The ground is shaking.
What about if the ground opens up?
Shit.
Oh,
Oh! No!
So what you just saw was an actual event that happened when the host of this episode, Samir, was trying to climb Mount Everest with his partners. There was a massive earthquake which led to an avalanche which nearly killed the climbers. They survived. And in this entire conversation, and you'll find that this entire conversation is the most practical and detailed conversation that you'll ever listen to around the subject and topic of Mount Everest, of climbing, what it really takes to climb the highest and the most difficult peaks in the entire world. And what I've realized, that you don't just need the highest skills and the best equipments and the training, but you also need the grace of God to survive. This episode was full of learnings that I never thought I could even understand because I have not experienced climbing Mount Everest. Watch this episode, listen to this episode to really understand what it takes to climb such highest peaks. The dangers, what can happen, how your life could be in danger, and why the grace of the divine, of the gods, is so important when you're undertaking such massive challenges in life, and what you gain. So for anyone who's struggling with their purpose in life, this episode will really fill you up with a lot of motivation to achieve your dreams. Listen to this episode, watch to this episode, and if you find value in it, do subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Sam, first of all, welcome to the Discovery of an Author podcast. It is an absolute honor to have you on our show, and I'm really excited to talk to you about your experiences and the subject of the book that you've written. So welcome.
Thank you so very much, Raghav. And apologies, Suraj could not be with us. He's currently leading an expedition in Ladakh, but I will try my best to fill in for him as well.
No, that's absolutely fine, man. Let him be in Ladakh. Let him take care of the people who are with him. That's, I think, more important than this thing. But yeah, thank you so much, man. So Samir, I'm gonna say something. When I read your book, What's Your Everest? And I read about the personal journeys that you guys have gone through your corporate career. So I'm going to narrate my own personal story. I was in Infosys after I did my graduation from Narsi Monji, Bombay. I went into the first batch of Infosys. And I went there. And I instantly realized that I was lost. I instantly realized that I was in the wrong place. The only silver lining of my Infosys was my girlfriend. That was the only beautiful part about that entire experience. Got into Infosys Mangalore, stayed there for 2 years, 2.5 years. And, I always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to start a magazine of my own. And when I was working in the Infosys, I used to start writing articles. I used to find people who could write and give them subjects to write on. And eventually I was able to create my own magazine. Right. And I remember the day when I was going to that portal, I forgot the name of the portal, employee portal or whatever it is called. It's long back. And I hit that, resign. I resign and everything. Before that, I had a call with my colleague. He was on site.
That's right.
So we were on conference call and he's like, Raghav, what about the task that was assigned to you? Is it complete? And there were a couple of more people on the call. And I'm like, Yeah, actually, I'm quitting. And he's like, Raghav, let me call you. He called me back.
Right.
And he's like, dude, tell me what happened. So I told him, ki, yaar, magazine is my passion. History is my passion. Literature is my passion. I want to pursue that. And I don't think if I'm going to get a chance if I don't do it. And you know what he
Right.
said? He's like, how old are you, man? I'm like, 23. He's like, go do it. He's like, go after it.
Right.
And I felt such a relief, and also I was very scared when I resigned. And this is what I resonated with your book. This is when you are taking the leap,
Right.
when you are leaving your comfort to do something that you feel is your calling. See, sometimes it is passion that takes over you. Sometimes the road is not yet charted clearly in front of you, but
Correct.
that passion overpowers you, and somewhere down your gut, you know this is the path for me. And when I read your book, What's Your Everest, this is exactly what I found. I could resonate, and I want people to read the book so that if they want to do something in their life and they feel they're stuck, dude, your book's gonna light that fire.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Raghav. And I'm glad that you could relate so much
Yeah,
to it.
absolutely. I had the same journey, man. Sam, let's start with the first question. Why did you write this book?
In hindsight, of course, you get to hear a lot of inspiration from authors, but I think honestly, I don't think Suraj and I went down that way saying that we're going to write a book and inspire many people. I strongly believe that when we had these experiences on the mountain, we would come back and we would share these experiences to family and friends. And the next instance would be, why did you write a book, right? And I think somewhere along the way, it became more about just capturing those experiences in a format where not only we could remember, but we could also disperse to a wider audience. And by the process of writing down those experiences and then saying, okay, what do you do with it? Let's approach a couple of publishing houses. And that's pretty much how the progression took place. It became about just sharing our story, and sharing the experiences that we had in the mountains. And as we started writing more about it, I think that's when we went into a more reflective mode about those instances, because it gave us an opportunity to revisit some of those moments in our life. And that's when we realized there was an opportunity to delve a little deeper into those emotions.
Great. Sam, I want you to tell the viewers what you are doing right now. Who are you? What company do you run? And what are the services that your company offers?
Okay, great. So thanks. We actually, Suraj and I run a company called Adventure Pulse. We're based in India, and we started up our company back in 2010. And interestingly, the book pretty much describes how the company evolved, and how we ended up following our passion and creating this little baby of taking people into the mountains and allowing them to experience their own adventures of sorts. Now, that pretty much sums up what Adventure Pulse is all about. We believe that Adventure Pulse is an enabler where ordinary people, not sports people, not specialists, but ordinary people like you and me can go out there and experience an adventure, whether it's a trek, whether it's a mountain climb, and get that feeling of overcoming their own limitations and conquering their own Everest. And that's pretty much how the title of the book came out, What's Your Everest? And we've been doing this now for the past 15 years. 2010 is when we started. It's now 2025. And by, we realized that it wasn't just about the mountains, but what if we could bring the lessons from the mountains into the boardroom? And so part and parcel of what we do is also a lot of facilitation, specifically with respect to soft skill development in companies, talking about the experiences that you have in the mountains. We do a lot of adventure workshops for schools, and it's always great to inspire the future generation of switching off their tablets and mobile phones and getting in the outdoors, pitching a tent and experiencing what nature has to offer. And I think pretty much the year goes by in a combination of visiting destinations like Leh Ladakh, Nepal, trekking, climbing mountains. In fact, I'm just back from Russia. We led a very successful team to Mount Elbrus, which is the highest mountain of Europe. And Soraj is just back from Africa, having led a very successful team on Kilimanjaro. So yeah, that's the idea. I mean, to love climbing mountains and to be able to share that experience and passion with people as well.
And I think what differentiates you guys, just one second, what differentiates you guys, when you started this company, you have climbed Mount Everest. You and your partner, you both have climbed Mount Everest, right? And not just Mount Everest, you have probably climbed most of the peaks around the world. That's a very rare thing to have. It's yeah, because in India, there are other companies that I know of, trekking companies, hiking companies, but very rarely do individuals like us who are laymen, who have never climbed a stone in their entire life, let alone a mountain, get to interact with someone who has climbed Mount Everest. So very quickly, Sam, tell me what all mountains have you and your partner individually climbed? Because that will add gravity and the gravitas to why you started this company and why we're having this conversation.
Right. Yeah, actually, honestly, if I had to sit down and list all the mountains we've climbed, it's going to be interesting and difficult and long. But yeah, I mean, in India, we've climbed a couple of the mountains in the Himachal region, Friendship Peak, Shitidar, and these are mountains that we climbed during our mountaineering course. And that's important to know that, there are institutes in India that specialize in imparting mountaineering training. We've ended up climbing quite a few mountains in Leh Ladakh, Stokkangri, Kangyatse 1, 2, Zozongo. We've also had an opportunity to climb quite a few mountains abroad as well. Mount Elbrus in Russia being a couple of them. Kilimanjaro, I've personally climbed it 7 times, and so has Soraj. Recently, we climbed Mount Aconcagua, which is the highest mountain of the continent of South America. And of course, in Nepal, I think within the Everest Valley, there's some 6,000-meter peaks. Island Peak, Labuche Peak, Mera Peak, which is in the adjoining national park. So I think over the last 15 years, we have climbed, I would say, over 20 plus mountains. But there are a lot of expeditions which we were tempted to climb and had to turn back from the summit without having reached the summit. So I think it's a collective experience of several peaks, both at 6,000, 7,000, and 8,000 meters.
And 8,000 meters being the highest, that is Mount Everest, roughly 8,000 meters.
That's right. I mean, on Everest, unfortunately, we've not really had a chance to climb too many other 8,000-meter peaks because we spent 3 attempts just climbing Everest. And of course, the cost of climbing Everest is something that we'll talk about by and by.
Yeah. That is amazing. Sam, now what I want to understand is a fundamental question that I really do not know an answer. Sports. You play any sport, it's also publicized, it comes on the television.
Correct.
You run. I am not an athlete, but I can still run. There are marathons. I don't necessarily have to compete in the Olympics or the international games or the Asian games to be a runner. I can just run. I can cycle. I go to the gym. I don't, but people go to the gym
Right.
for working out. So what I want to understand, what is mountaineering? Is this something? Is this the passion of the rich? Is this a sport? Do you have national mountaineering or international mountaineering competitions like the Olympics? What is mountaineering?
I think it's a very deep question and a complicated question as well. If you actually look at the history of mountaineering evolved as a discipline as part of scientific expeditions. I mean, the initial forays into the mountains, if you read stories of Eric Shipton, the British expedition, Edmund Hillary as well, these were all part of countries sending out an exploratory team to extremely hostile ecosystems to collect data, whether it was soil data, whether it was temperatures, whether to study the human physiology at extreme temperatures. And that's pretty much how mountaineering started off. And the history of mountaineering is very recent. I think it is less than 150 years old, as opposed to a lot of other disciplines. Is it a sport? Honestly, I don't think so. It is now slowly parts of mountaineering are evolving into a sport, but I think the best way to describe it is sports are played in stadiums built by men, and mountaineering is a discipline in a stadium built by the gods, right? I mean, there's no defined set of rules. There's no start time, stop time, and parts of mountaineering, things like rock climbing, bouldering, these are small subsets of mountaineering that are now being incorporated into the Olympics, to answer your question. So, for example, the Japan Olympics of 2020, which took place during COVID, was the first year in which rock climbing and bouldering was introduced into the Olympics as a specialist sport per se. But again, it required, an artificial stadium to be built specifically to allow athletes to compete. And I think that becomes a huge difference between, let's say, participating in a stadium versus going and climbing the mountains. Because at the end of the day, the endeavor to reach the top of the mountain doesn't require competition with other athletes. It literally involves you competing with your own limitations, using your own resources, using the time that is available to you, not defined by man, but by the weather, by the environmental conditions, by God in a way. And so there are extenuating circumstances which require you not just to compete with yourself, but also to depend on a larger team. So every time you see a climber on the summit of a mountain, holding up a flag saying that I've reached the top of the mountain, it's always important to remember that there's a team, an ecosystem that's there to make that person reach the top, right? There's a guy who's always holding the camera to take that picture, for example. There are no podium finishes. There are no medals that you get. There's no fluttering checkered flag at the end of the line. And those make it very, very different from, let's say, when you run a marathon and you finish off, and then you have this big announcement that says, "Congratulations, you're a marathon winner or an Ironman finisher." And I think that's where there's a lot of motivation required and discipline that is required in order to build that mental, physical, and emotional endurance to climb mountains. I think those are the fundamental differences. And of course, it has now broadened off. You have rock climbing, you have extreme mountain climbing, like climbing Everest and other mountains where a lot more technical skills are concerned. But you also have this section in between, which is called hiking and trekking, where you have a large enthusiasm of people who want to go to the mountains and experience what it's like to physically challenge themselves, but don't really necessarily need to have technical knowledge and skills to climb a mountain. And I think the second part of your question, how do you relate it to finding yourself? I think the simplicity of going on a trek, where you disconnect from the troubles of home, where you disconnect from networks, from emails, from social media, where a large part of the day is spent, just walking. It gives you a lot of opportunity to introspect on your life, to hear those thoughts in your head, which normally you don't have time to hear, and actually reflect on some of the things, some of the challenges that you faced, an opportunity to talk to other trekkers who are also on that journey. And a lot of people find it very healing. There's a lot of spiritual connection also, because it becomes very similar to meditation. And that life that you lead, you wake up early in the morning, you have breakfast, you walk for 6 to 7 hours, you stop in between, have a lunch break, you have early dinner, because the mountains, pahadon mein, you always have to have an early dinner because everybody goes to sleep early. There's no Netflix and chill. You get a good 7, 8 hours sleep in the night because you're tired. And then the next day you wake up and you repeat it. You're living out of a small bag, a rucksack or duffel bag. So you learn to be minimalistic in your experience. So yeah, I mean, if the way I'm describing it, a lot of people can probably associate it with either meditation, vipassana, a very, very clean, very technological detox state of existence. So I think that's why trekking is starting to become very, very popular, especially in today's day and age.
Beautiful. So basically, to break down what you said, it's very interesting. You know what got me goosebumps? When you said that mountaineering started as a scientific expedition, that got me. I'm like, wow. So basically, see, think about it, Sam. So mountaineering and going to all these hostile and remote places and climbing initially started as a data collection exercise for the scientists.
That's right.
So they were driven by science.
Absolutely.
They were not driven by spirituality. They were not driven by God or nature or solace. They were on a mission. Ki we need to go, and I think that is how they developed everything so technical and analytical. Ki, okay, we need this equipment, we need that equipment, we need certain people who can assist us, who can teach us. They created the entire training regime. They must have done a lot of R&D to know how to, and that is how it created. So what I find very fascinating is that an ecosystem which started with a scientific inquiry in mind created the structure in the process and everything. They created the road, and now a lot of people can use that to discover themselves.
True, absolutely.
Isn't it fascinating? So science, for science, something started that eventually paved the way for the masses to also follow, not for any data collection, but for also discovering what you are made up of. What's your Everest? You can find that answer. And I think that when you were saying that equation was very mind blowing. I also want to ask you, Sam, a couple of times you said that is the field of the gods, and a couple of times you mentioned God. I want to be very direct with it. Why did you not use the word nature as against God? And did so many years of mountaineering made you a spiritual man? Or were you always spiritual? Or do you think that when you're climbing such mountains, some level of spirituality or faith or surrenderness really helps you to keep on going?
It's interesting because when you're on a trek and you're standing in front of mountains which are 7,000, 8,000 meters high, you're talking about 25,000 feet high. It's a very humbling experience, right? And standing there looking at these huge creations, it does humble you. And also to a large extent, it's not just about the nature, right? It's also about interacting with the people that belong to these places. Like, for example, in Nepal, when you go, you end up interacting with the Sherpa community, especially in the Everest region. If you end up climbing in Aconcagua, for example, right? A lot of the climbers and mountaineers over there are descendants from the Inca tribes. And they talk a lot about the synergy between nature and their own belief system. And each one of the mountains are, in a way, reflected as or believed to be a deity, a god or goddess. And so there's a lot of reverence. So, for example, even when we're climbing Everest, there's a very elaborate puja ceremony that we do at Everest Base Camp, where we actually and humbly request for permission from Sagar Mata, or the Nepali name for Everest, to give us permission to go and climb to the top and come back. And I think when you get exposed to that over and over again, there's a reverence for the belief system of the people over there. So it's not just about religion, as you correctly said. There's a very strong spiritual connection. And especially when you're navigating these extremely tough conditions, crossing these massive glaciers where there are cracks in the ice that can open up at any point in time, where there's an ice wall in front of you and you're desperately trying to take in a deep breath of air just to pull yourself 1 foot at a time. Those are moments when, if you don't believe in a higher power to help you cross that section, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether you can be an atheist and not go into these places without believing in a higher power to look after you and protect you.
Oh, that's a very interesting and a heavy thing to say. Yeah. Heavy, I'll tell you why. I do understand if people from Nepal and India, because Nepal is also a Hindu nation, Hindu state. India is, though it's not a Hindu state, but majority is Hindu. For us to pray, it makes sense because we do associate Himalayas and Himachal and all these mountains with Shiv and Parvati. Uh, do you also know of these other mountaineers from different countries doing some or the other kind of worship before they're climbing? And if they are not doing, then they are still able to do it. So just want to understand that, I mean, is this somehow benefits us as against those mountaineers who are just practical and technical and tactical? They just want to climb what they see. So does having praying or doing some kind of puja give us some kind of an edge? And if it does not, why cannot this thing be completely and 100% technical?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've had a chance to interact with mountaineers from different parts of the world, Europe, America, even South America, and I think there's a reverence for the belief system in the place that you're climbing. Now, the puja ceremony that I mentioned to you, even though is for the Sherpa community, it's not like the mountaineers stay away from the puja ceremony. It's not like tu apna cheez karna and we will come and join you later. They are very part and parcel wanting to be part of the ceremony as well, right? And I feel that this belief system that is there in each one of these mountains definitely transcends geographical boundaries, transcends nationality. And I think the reverence with which everybody, all the mountaineers who are in Nepal that participate in a ceremony like this is quite enthusiastic. I don't think it's restricted only to one or the other. I mean, obviously the awareness of the amount of knowledge may be different. But yeah, mountaineers who come from Europe and participate in the ceremony, they do participate with equal amount of reverence. I participate with equal amount of reverence. And I've seen this in other countries as well. Recently, when we were climbing in Russia, it was interesting because my guide Nikolai turned to me and turned to the group and said, we are going to be approaching the summit, so please be respectful because we believe that the mountain is very spiritual, and then if you reach the summit, you can ask for whatever you want, and if you really have faith, it will come true. And it was such an interesting thing to say because there's so many people that you know of, or you hear stories of people who end up doing crazy things like reaching the top of the mountain and going topless, or deciding to do something for a record. But generically, I think there's a lot of reverence, especially when you're climbing a mountain.
So basically, the reverence take the forms of the physical worship, or it can be mental. That's the reverence that is taking the form of these things. Now, that could be physical worship, that could be just mental reverence, that could be just spiritual, that could be emotional. But that you're saying is something common. So even if you went to Kilimanjaro, which is South Africa, over there also, I'm sure there must have been some kind of belief or reverence, if not a physical puja, but some kind of respect for the entity that you're about to approach.
Absolutely. I mean, over there, so Kilimanjaro being located in Tanzania, just next to the mountain, there's a tribe over there, and invariably, most of the people who are supporting you on the mountain belong from this tribe. So the kind of energy that you have on Kilimanjaro is not just about climbing the mountain, but they speak Swahili over there, and if you're exhausted and you're tired, the team sings, they dance, they sing some of the local songs. And a lot of the local songs is reverence for the mountain as well. And even on the way up to the summit, when you're climbing in the night, you as a trekker or a climber are exhausted. But the guides, the team, the support team that's there, they're constantly singing chants and encouraging you and filling you with energy as you approach the summit of the mountain.
Then Sam, tell me, what's the deal with Mount Kailash, yaar? Because I'll tell you why. Now that you've said that even when you're climbing Everest and everything, you do take the permission from the DT or the presiding DT and everything.
Correct.
Mount Kailash is supposed to be the most sacred mountain for Tibetans, Hindus. I'm forgetting another clan.
Jainism.
Jains and Buddhist. Tibetan ho gaya wo. ठीक है. In सब के लिए it's a very sacred thing. Now I don't believe in any kind of mumbo jumbo. ठीक है? Because that keeps me sane in a world which is already fucked up.
You're right.
Tell me, what's the deal with Mount Kailash? Tell me why has it never been summited, though people have tried? Is it because of the government now does not allow? And even if there was no such restrictions by any kind of government, why still was it not submittable?
It's interesting. And again, historically, you have to understand that, as I said, mountaineering is only about 100, 150 years old, right? But before that, most of these mountains were revered as gods and goddesses. Even Everest, by the Tibetans is called Chomolungma, which is mother goddess of the earth. And interestingly, if you go to the Himalayas, they use this term Devbhumi, which basically means the land of the gods. They say that you pathar uthao and you'll find a god or goddess underneath it. A lot of these mountains historically have been worshipped, as part of the local religious culture and belief system. And so, to answer your question, you have to understand that most mountains at some point in time are revered as gods and goddesses. It's only when the Western white man came into these mountains and said, I am white and I want to go climb these mountains, but I can't lift my bag. Will you help me? That the local community said, okay, we will help you out. And that's pretty much how they got involved in terms of climbing mountains. Now, Mount Kailash, you have to understand, before people were even thinking about climbing mountains, more than 1,000 years ago, more than 2,000 years ago, has been treated as a deity, as the abode of Lord Shiva. And of course, there are a lot of other religions that have now been associated with Mount Kailash. Over a period of time, as a respect for the mountain, it was forbidden. And then when people said, no, but why is it forbidden? I want to go climb. I think evolved stories of, if you go climb it, either you age or there's a problem. There are a lot of stories that have been built around it. But I feel it's also a way of protecting the ecosystem of the mountain. A lot of these mountains have very delicate ecologies, and therefore it has evolved as stories to also protect the mountain. Yeah. Having said that, in the pilgrimages that go to Mount Kailash, where they do the parikrama of the outer Kora, inner Kora, there is a lot of impact on the environment over there. But to a large extent, Mount Kailash, because of the religious connotation for so many religions, I think a lot of stories have evolved to protect the mountain. It's not very high. It's only about 6,600. Everest is 8,848. So it's not so much about technical. There have been people who have attempted to climb it. I don't know whether the stories are true, whether, in a week or 2 weeks, they've aged rapidly and come back and they've died because they've been cursed. Of course, there's a lot of stories that go around these mountains. But I think what happens is that, it's difficult to believe these stories when you're sitting in an urban setting like you and me right now, where there's electricity and stuff. But in these places, you have to understand these mountains are very, very remote, very inaccessible. And so sometimes when you hear stories about people aging quickly, or, in the Himalayas, there's a Yeti, which is an 8-foot gorilla that kidnaps young boys and girls. Sometimes you find yourself also ending up believing these things. And in a way, it protects the mountain as well.
आई एम सो सॉरी फॉर द सडन इंटरप्शन. ये हमें करना पड़ता है और हमको इसी प्रकार से इंटरप्ट करना पड़ता है. बट आई हैव अ रिक्वेस्ट कि गाइज, अगर आपको थोड़ी भी वैल्यू लग रही है in what we are providing with our podcast, in the kind of content that we are creating, and in the kind of people that we are bringing on our show, please subscribe to our channel. This is the only way in which any podcast on YouTube can grow. It will cost you nothing. आपने सिर्फ सब्सक्राइब करना है. And trust me guys, if you subscribe to this podcast, we'll make sure that we continue delivering you such amazing content, intelligent content. हम एक intelligent podcast create करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. That is why हमारे जितने भी guest होते हैं वो सारे published authors होते हैं, जिनका work के there's a backing to their work. कोई भी कुछ ऐसे नहीं बोल रहा. So guys, please subscribe to our channel and continue enjoying and listening to this episode. Do you feel that if you do remove all these restrictions and if you separate Mount Kailasha from the connotation of being a spiritual or a divine entity, people will eventually figure out a way to climb it? Because there's nothing that you cannot achieve with skill and precision and technicalities and failures. You yourself climbed Mount Everest for in the third attempt, but you were able to do it.
Correct.
So if you do you feel that if you do remove these technicalities, no matter how difficult Mount Kailasha might end up being to climb, it is still climbable because people are climbing K2. And I have heard K2 is pretty badass.
That's right. That's right.
It's
Yeah.
pretty badass, but people have done it. And Sam, what I believe, and I want people to take this, is that if there is something that is present in the nature that the human beings can see, it's accessible.
That
It's
is
fucking
true.
doable.
That is true.
Otherwise,
That
it
is true.
wouldn't have been there. It would have been in
Yeah.
some. There are stories of something called a Shambhala, some hidden mountain and nonsense crap. Again, I don't believe in that. तो वो वहाँ होता है ना यार. So Sam, now we'll come to the best part. Now that we have understood the fundamentals, I want to come to your story, your life, and your partner's life and story. I want you to tell me first, before we move on to all of your attempts and everything associated with it, when did you and Swaraj decide that you want to climb Mount Everest and not just the base camp? What was that moment that you decided कि नहीं ये तो करना है, and we have not decided this by drinking a couple of beers or tequila shots. Consciously decide, knowing that this is what you also want to do from the perspective of your career.
It's interesting that you put that question, because looking back, there's never one defining point. There's always that concept है ना, inception, जहाँ पे seed plant होता है idea का. So in 2008, right, this is way back when nobody from India was doing the Everest base camp trek. Swaraj actually trekked up to the Everest base camp, and he was one young corporate guy with Standard Chartered Bank, and वो मुश्किल से 14 days का leave मिला था उसको, and he ended up going for this trek. And of course, standing in that Everest base camp, which is the glacier of Everest, looking up and seeing this mountain in front of you and being told this is the highest mountain in the world, he got very excited, and he walked up to a Sherpa who was part of her team and said, यार मेरे पास 2-3 दिन और एक्स्ट्रा लीव है और थोड़ा सा और पैसा है, तो आप क्या मुझे ऊपर लेके जा सकते हो? And that Sherpa looked at him and started laughing, right? And he couldn't understand why, because he said, हाँ यार, I got 2-3 days extra and कितना दूर होगा? And I think when the Sherpa started laughing at him, that's when it created that curiosity as to, but Q, what's the big deal? And of course, coming back down, we ended up talking and started doing a lot of research. And that's when we realized how difficult it is to climb Mount Everest. The time it takes, the cost of climbing it, and care, of course, at somewhere that was the back of our head. And then subsequently, we both started off Adventure Pulse with the endeavor to end up going and exploring more mountains and trekking. And we started Adventure Pulse in 2010. And by 2014, 13, 14, I think that's when that idea for the back of our head came in the front again, saying that, listen, up to we have a legit reason to go climb Mount Everest. We have started our business. Not only do we take people for trekking and climbing, but if we climb Everest, then we will become experts and industry professionals. And that classic gyan that you must align your personal and professional goals and aspirations to be able to proceed in life. It started making sense. And so we really started thinking, okay, maybe it can happen, maybe we can do it. And I think 2014 is when we decide, okay, let's go and climb Mount Everest.
Now, Sam, tell me, let's take a use case. And with that use case, I also want you can narrate your own story as well. So it took you 3 attempts to finally climb the Mount Everest. And I've read the book. I know about all the problems and challenges and things and everything that is involved. Okay, let's take a use case. Today, I decide I am an amateur. I'm a nobody. I'm a 36-year-old man who decides कि यार मेरे को चलो पैसा है मेरे पास, let's say मैं 15 साल से स्टार्टअप इकोसिस्टम में काम कर रहा हूँ, बैंगलोर में हूँ, पैसों के अलावा मेरे पास कुछ नहीं है, ना सेहत है, ट्रैफिक में फंसता हूं मैं, क्योंकि यही सब चीजें होती है. देन यू डिसाइड यू वांट टू डू समथिंग रैडिकल विद योर लाइफ.
करेक्ट.
यू लाइक फक दिस शिट, आई वांट टू पोस्ट कूल पिक्चर्स ऑन इंस्टाग्राम. कब तक मैं बैंगलोर के ट्रैफिक की फोटोज डालता रहूंगा, या कब तक ये पिक्चर देख रहा हूं, ये खाना खा रहा हूं, दुनिया के सब लोग को ये करते हैं.
करेक्ट.
आई वांट टू क्लाइंब माउंट एवरेस्ट टुडे. तो लेट्स ब्रेक डाउन फ्रॉम योर ओन एक्सपीरियंसेस. कितना पैसा लगता है, कितना टाइम लगता है, कितना मुश्किल है, एंड व्हाई इन टुडेज टाइम so many people are able to climb Mount Everest as well. We are getting to know of people, even girls who are young, fairly young, are able to climb Everest. And sometimes when you hear the stories, you're like, "Arey yaar, ye to hum bhi kar sakte hain." Taking this use case, you can also start with your first attempt at Mount Everest. The cost, the difficulties, the problems, the preparations. So let's start with the cost. When you decided कि you want to climb Mount Everest, कितना पैसा आपको पता चला कि भैया लगता है एक बंदे का?
I think that's the biggest challenge, before you end up thinking about climbing Everest is just the sheer cost of it. At that time in 2015, when we attempted to climb Everest, it was about, I think, 26 lakh rupees per person. But of course, US dollar, Indian rupee equation was very, very different. In today's day and age, the cost of climbing Everest would be about 45 lakh rupees.
Are you
And
serious? 45 lakh Indian rupees.
that's right. And this is just for one attempt. मतलब if you fail and come back, इसमें कोई Amazon return policy money back guarantee वाला concept नहीं है.
That's just an attempt, right?
That is just an attempt.
And what does this cost include?
So this cost, I think one of the biggest costs that it includes is just the permit or the royalty that you pay to the Nepal government. So the permission to climb Mount Everest from the Nepal government is 15,000 US dollars. And that's just for a piece of paper that says, okay, you have the permission to go and climb Everest. That's a big expense. The other big expense, of course, is the cost of running an expedition in a very, very hostile environment for a period of about 45 days. So the entire time period that it takes to climb Everest is anywhere from 45 to 60 days to reach the top of Mount Everest and come back. So that
So
also
for the
becomes a
60
huge
days,
factor.
you'll be in the mountains only. For the 60 days, for 2 months,
Absolutely.
you'll be in that.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, most Everest climbers end up starting off the expedition by the first week of April. And by the time they finish off the expedition and hopefully reach the summit, they end up coming back probably by the end of May, beginning of June. So, yeah, it's about 45 to 60 days.
And when you decided that you want to go, what preparations did you do? How did you approach it? What physical activities you did to keep your body fit? Anything that you had to do in terms of food to acclimatize yourself to the environment? And then also walk us through the challenges, the incidents, whatever you faced in your first attempts. I want to know your failure story.
Right.
When you attempted for the first time. What went wrong and what were your learnings from that?
So, I won't comment about how people prepared today, but I will talk about how we prepared. And we figured that, listen, you're attempting to climb the highest mountain in the world. So it's not like as if you can wake up one day and do it. So we figured that I think the four big factors were that do we have the right kind of technical skills? So in order to get the technical skills in the mountains, we went to the Mountaineering Institute, the Nehru Institute of Mountaineering, which is at Uttarkashi. And they run a 30-day basic mountaineering course. And if you get an A grade, then you can apply for the advanced mountaineering course. And they teach you the basic equipment, the fundamentals of how to survive in the mountain. And I felt that was very important to have that textbook technical knowledge, at the back of your head. I think that was important. The second most important thing that we felt at that point in time was build up the experience. So know how you can react while climbing mountain at 5,000 meters, go higher, try doing 6,000, go higher, try doing 7,000. And so you're trying to build up that experience of being able to handle the biggest and hopefully the toughest mountain in your life. And I think the third most important thing was slowly and steadily building a strong team of people around you. Because as I told you earlier, it's never about that one person on top of the mountain. It's about having this team, having this ecosystem of people around you that in case something happens, you fall down the side of the mountain, who are you attached to with a rope, right? Will that person be able to hold you, support you, make sure you survive and come back home safely? So I think these three were the most important thing. And of course, the fourth and most important thing was figuring out the money. How do you get that money together? Do you have a rich uncle? Do you have a massive bank balance? If you don't have any of that, how do you jugaad that money together? And going back to your earlier question, is it a sport only meant for the rich? Well, it does require a lot of money, but if you're smart enough and you're passionate enough, then you can try figuring out how to jugaad that money. And when you start looking at this, it kind of resembles to a very large extent any kind of passion project that you start. For example, you as well, at some point in time, you decided, okay, I need to technically be sound. I need to build up the experience of knowing how to run a magazine. I need to be able to put together the money to be able to afford the equipment that I need. And of course, at the end of the day, it comes down to equating it with any other kind of passion project.
So, how were you able to get hold of the money?
I think that would require a separate podcast altogether. Everything. I mean, you try being as jugadu as possible, find family and friends, crowdfunding. We did interesting things like went to the local pubs in Pune and Bombay and ran lottery tickets and I think approached sponsors and tried to convince them that how we could take the flag to the top of the world and showcase their brand. We had a lot of support from family and friends, from office colleagues, from college roommates, and I think it literally started with one penny, 1 rupee at a time.
So, Sam, now tell me what went wrong in the first attempt. Why were you not able to climb? Were there any incidents that, or any NDE as well, near death experiences, or something you were like, oh man, we are now screwed? So, I want to know what went wrong in the first time. What stopped you from summiting Everest? And what was the learning from that?
I think at that point in time in 2015 is when we made the first attempt, and all these things that I told you about, the experience, the training, the hard work, the preparation, the physical fitness, it all came together, and we'd managed to get all this money from family and friends. And finally, we were trekking towards Everest as Everest climbers. And, we were very excited by this experience. We'd worked really hard for almost a year just to make this expedition happen. Unfortunately, in 2015, on the 25th of April, that's when the Nepal earthquake took place. And this was a huge earthquake. I mean, it measured 7.9 on the Richter scale. In a matter of minutes, over 10,000 people lost their lives in the country of Nepal. UNICEF attributes to about 70 to 80,000 people who lost their homes. And in one small little part of Nepal, here we were, mountaineers, climbers, attempting to climb Everest. And with so much of destruction and devastation in the country, to a very large extent, we were kind of left on our own devices. Not too many people know, but this earthquake actually caused a massive avalanche at Everest Base Camp, which in itself caused a lot of destruction and devastation. It's recorded as one of the worst mountaineering disasters in the history of mountaineering. I think 22 people lost their lives on the spot, and a lot of people were displaced and affected to a large extent. And pretty much the Everest expedition came to a standstill. It's interesting because the 25th of April also happens to be my wife's birthday. And, that morning, we actually woke up at Everest Base Camp with everybody reminding me, saying that Sam died, please call Didi and wish her. And so spent the morning wishing her, apologizing for missing her birthday. As you can imagine, husbands can get into trouble for. And we were sitting in the dining tent, and the dining tent is this communal space where the team gets together. We eat food, but we also spend time bonding. So we were watching a movie on the laptop when suddenly, at about 11:55, we felt the ground shaking below us. And at first, I thought it was the glacier shifting, but it was really shaking violently. And one of the boys in the team, one of the helpers, the Nepali staff, shouted Bhukam, Bhukam Ayo, which is very similar to the Hindi word for earthquake. And immediately we realized this was something that was massive, bigger than what we'd experienced. So we ran out of the tent and we are looking at Everest because, I mean, we're sitting at the foot of the biggest mountain in the world, when suddenly from behind us, there's the sound of an explosion, like a bomb going off. We turn around, and that's when we realized that the earthquake had caused a glacier from the mountain behind Everest called Pumori, which caused a massive block of ice to come crashing down 1 vertical kilometer. And it fell and exploded like a bomb going off. And when we turned, we saw this huge wave, literally like a tsunami, rushing towards us. And I think not just people, but tents, everything just started disappearing, that cloud of snow and ice. And we realized that we had seconds to react. I think in my panic, we jumped into the tent. So imagine 100,000 tons of ice is falling on your head. It's like as a Burj Khalifa is falling on top of you. And you jump into something made of kapra. Fortunately, Tashi Sherpa, a 10-time Everest climber, had better presence of mind. He grabbed me by the collar and pulled me under the table. And that's when this thing hit. And it really felt like as if somebody had hit you in the chest. The entire tent structure collapsed on top of us. So we were immersed in pure darkness. The weight of that snow and ice just kept burying us. And you can't breathe because you have particles of snow going into your mouth, it's going into your nose. It really felt like as if somebody had held me from the back of my head and was pushing me underwater. You're suffocating. And I think in those seconds, um, the only thought you have is, oh God, I don't want to die. I think those moments were definitely one of the scariest in my life. It was nothing like in the movies where they say, if you think you're going to die, you see your life flashing before your eyes. ऐसा कुछ नहीं होता है. You just think, I don't want to die. I
Oh
think,
man.
fortunately, this went on for about only a minute, but that minute felt like infinity. And then that sound of thunder and that vibration had stopped. And Tashi shouted, everybody okay? And surprisingly, I'm like, yes. And we start digging ourselves out of the snow and ice. And when we came out, all the tents, everything was destroyed. It looked like a scene from an air crash. It was just pure destruction and devastation.
Sam, how do you recover for some from such an incident? How do you regain your sense of balance and mental endurance after such an incident? कि नहीं, it's okay, पर जो करना है वो तो करना ही है, and this is part and parcel of life. How do you make peace with it? How much time did it take you to get your power back?
Honestly, I don't know whether we had too much of time to think about it, because when we came out, and we've described this at great length in the book as well, this entire experience, I think we were much younger. I mean, 2015, so I'm talking about 10 years ago, right? And fortunately, in the neighboring camp, the Indian Army was also climbing Everest, and Major Jamwal was the expedition leader, and we happened to know him. And next day, obviously we were quite shaken, and we went and walked up to him and we asked him, Ki, sir, kya karna hai? And this man has climbed mountains before we were even thinking about climbing mountains, right? I mean, hardcore, tough, Fauji guy. He's even lost a finger in an expedition. And he looks at us and he says, yeah, I have climbed this mountain 4 times. And in all the mountains I've ever climbed, this is the worst disaster. If you guys are okay, I think you should just descend down for safety. And you can imagine our shock. We were here to climb Everest. We'd worked so hard. I mean, we'd saved together almost 60 lakh rupees for two of us to be able to climb Everest. And we're like, Jao bhai, agle saal aa jao. And that was like a shock. And I think at that point in time, we asked him, he's like, Sir, aap kya karoge? What are you going to do? And his answer was so simple and so beautiful. He said, Hum to fauj hai yaar. We will stay back and we will help.
Wow.
And I think that statement, it just clicked. It just changed the perspective. And we realized that, in this situation, why are we thinking about us? There are other people that need help, right? And my dad is in the Navy, Suraj's father's in the army. And we were like, Sir, hum to fauji ke bacche hai, to can we help out also in any particular
Oh
way?
wow. Yeah.
Uh, and I think that made a difference, right? I mean, we ended up staying back and we ended up helping in the rescue and relief operations. And because we were not thinking about ourselves, we were thinking about whatever we could do in that area. The perspective of being Hi Ram, kya hua, what happened to us, it changed and it became more about, okay, what can we do? Can we help somebody? And that's when the expedition changed focus also. It wasn't about climbing the mountain anymore. it was about being able to help people as much as we could.
What a beautiful, what a beautiful experience. I mean, what happened is sad, but then it turned into a beautiful realization, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so surreal sometimes that incidents that can nearly take your life away can give you a learning that can really take everyone with you forward.
Yeah,
Absolutely
absolutely.
beautiful. Now I understand the experiences that you can have on such terrains and how it can translate into lessons.
Without a doubt. In fact, you won't believe it. When we finished off and finally we realized the is saal nahi hone wala and we started walking down, you know, you have to remember that we were on a very small part of Nepal and we only saw the destruction around us. But as we started descending, as we walked through the villages, we saw homes that were destroyed completely. And the people who lived in those homes were friends of ours because we've been working in this valley. And rather than sit down and say, "Hi Ram, kya hua? Government aake hame bachayenge," they had already pitched a tent outside. They'd shifted their family inside the tent, and they were going back into those homes and starting off the process of rebuilding, pulling out bricks, wood. And when we saw them, their strength, their resilience, we realized that, "ठीक है यार, we are okay. We've not gotten hurt. The mountain is still there. Maybe we've lost some money or a lot of money in this case, but we can always come back and climb." These people have lost their homes, they've lost so much, and they're not sitting and crying about it. They're already moving on with life. And I think that strength, that resilience that we witnessed in them, I think that gave us the courage to put all this back behind us and keep moving forward.
Man, beautiful. What a beautiful way to see life, right? What a
Absolutely, without a
beautiful way
doubt.
to see life. And Sam, now let's also I want to touch upon what happened or what went wrong in the second attempt. Why even the second attempt was not successful, and what again were the learnings from that? Because it can be pretty heartbreaking. Because the amount of energy and effort and physical endurance and money and everything that is required to do such a thing and to not succeed even after the second attempt. And then you were finally able to succeed in the third, to even transition from the second failure towards the third attempt. So I want to know what went wrong and what were your learnings and how were you able to push yourself again to go back and attempt it for the third time.
So, after we finished off with the earthquake and avalanche, of course, we had this belief that, okay, we can always come back and try next year, but it's not so easy to recover that large sum of money as well and start from scratch. As I told you, there's no money back guarantee in this. So it took us almost 2 years to be able to put together the money once more. Again, through the support of family, friends, batchmates, classmates, Jugad, trying to figure out how to put it all together. And we are back in 2017 now, 2 years later. And what was interesting is that the same team we had with us, where we had our same cook, who's at Everest Base Camp. And imagine 45 days, you want to have the comfort as much as possible for home. We had the same Sherpas with us. Even that kitchen boy who shouted "Bukam, Bukam Ayo," even the same boy, Lakpa, was with us as well, right? And now 2 years later, the team is back together. 25th of April comes, we have a special puja to commemorate and respect the experiences of what everybody's gone through. I miss my wife's birthday again. Fortunately, she's not so mad at me. She's just happy that I'm alive. Yeah, and now we've done much better. We've set up all our camps, and between base camp and the summit. In fact, that's Mount Everest right behind me. So between base camp and the summit, we actually set up 4 camps, and we spend a lot of this time going up to these camps, setting it up with basic necessities, a tent, oxygen, some food, and we come back down, and we keep repeating this process over this period of 45 days. And so we'd actually set up all these camps. And on the 14th of May, the base camp manager, Ghansham, a very close friend of ours, comes to us and says, guys, you've done a really good job. You're ready. The weather on the summit is looking great on the 18th of May. The winds, which usually are very, very strong on the top of Everest, will now be low at about 10 to 20 kilometers per hour. And this is the perfect time for you to attempt going on the summit. And so obviously, we are very excited and we start climbing through the night and we're making great progress. We've moved up to the mountain, camp one, camp two, camp three, and finally we're entering this area above 8,000 meters, which is called the death zone. And this is called the death zone because this is the most dangerous part of Everest. The oxygen level over here is 70%, 75% less than what you're breathing right now. And so you have to use supplementary oxygen. And so we went to the death zone. And as we entered the death zone, we realized there's something wrong. Those winds that were supposed to be 20 kilometers per hour are suddenly like 100, 150 kilometers per hour. And so, fighting these winds, we struggle and we reach Camp 4. And this place, Camp 4, which is also called South Col, we have to physically pitch our own tents. And this process of pitching your own tent, which normally takes 3 minutes, 4 minutes, took us the better part of 25 minutes because the winds are so strong. Five grown men are trying to hold down this fabric. And finally, we get it down and we get inside and we start waiting for the weather to improve. And 8 o'clock in the night is when we're supposed to leave for the final section to move up to the summit. And the sun sets, the winds are not stopping, it's getting worse. And 8 o'clock comes and goes, and we realize that, oh my God, I can't believe it's not going to happen again. Obviously, you don't think that, you're hoping for the best, but those winds continued through the entire night. And we ended up, I think, five grown men sitting inside a small little tent, 6 feet by 4 feet, huddled together, in sub zero temperatures where the outside temperature was touching minus 60 degrees Celsius, winds blowing at 150 kilometers per hour. It's literally like you're sitting in a drum and somebody's banging it constantly. You can't even talk to each other. And you can't even fall asleep because, the danger of falling asleep over here is that you can fall asleep and not wake up. So we're constantly keeping each other awake by kicking each other so that, we don't fall asleep. And by next morning, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, we realize that the winds are not stopping and it's just getting worse. We radioed down to the team down to ask them, listen, what's happening? What's the situation like? And they say, the weather is, there's no predictability. It could be better, it could be worse, but you have to take a decision. And I think that's the point in time when we realized that we were in a very precarious state because we'd planned to be there only for 24 hours. You're surviving on oxygen, your oxygen is getting over. And so what do? Do you try taking a chance of moving to the summit? Do you send two people and two people go back? Does everybody come back down? I think these are decisions that are easier to talk about right now in way, but when you're in such an extreme place, it became a very, very emotional discussion to have, and you can't even breathe properly, forget about talk. So I think we reached a stage where we realized that it was important to put the team safety above our individual greed to reach the top of Mount Everest. And for the second time, we ended up coming back from Mount Everest, having failed at reaching the summit.
Did you feel disheartened? Did you feel ki I'm done? I don't want to move ahead. There is no third attempt or fourth attempt.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I won't sugarcoat it. When I came back while descending down from Everest, I was so upset and I was so angry. I was like, I mean, obviously, there were a lot of abuses that were going through my mind at that point in time. But yeah, I was like, shit, I mean, this mountain has taken so much from me. It's taken money, it's almost taken my life twice. I mean, I'm done. I might as well just come and relax and find a low risk, high paying job where life is safe. I mean, if something happens to me, what will my family do? In those moments, yeah, I mean, it just didn't make sense. And when you come back from an experience like that, you hear well-meaning relatives telling you maybe it was not meant to be, or maybe it is a message from God, especially in a country like ours where God is a very large
Yeah.
factor in all our decisions. And they meant well, but I think it doesn't make you feel better, it makes you feel worse, right? I mean, you lived the first time, nobody climbed Everest, so you can justify it. But this time it was different. This time when we tried, we couldn't, but there were other people who were climbing. and they were like, "अरे उसने तो किया, तुमने तो नहीं किया," kind of thing, right? So I think the second time for me personally was much harder. I definitely wanted to give up.
So what made you go for round 3 then? How did you then center yourself again, and how did you make the same mindset, because you have to go through the same grilling process? It can be very taxing.
I'll be honest, I blame Suraj for it. You have to have that Kamina dost who gets you into trouble. So I think, when we came back from Everest, for a long time, we didn't talk to each other. I mean, what do you say to each other, right? Do you blame each other? Do you yell at each other, scream? Uh, you can't do all of that, or you can do all of that, but there's no point. And then suddenly, after almost a month, he puts his laptop down and he says, यार मुझे वापस जाना है. I can't sleep in the night. And I'm like, तू पागल है क्या? Are you crazy? How? Why? It's going to be so difficult. And he said, no, if we don't go back, I don't think I will ever be able to rest. And it's funny because he was echoing my thoughts as well. And I think that's important. And that was one of the biggest lessons that I could take away from this incident, that if I was alone, I would have given up.
Yeah.
But the fact that we were both in it together, and 2017, we are back in June, July. We say, okay, let's start preparing and let's not wait 2 years. Let's try in 2018. And by December of 2017, we've started this process of getting money together, but we didn't have that money. We had probably enough money for one person to go back. And this time when we were calling friends and family, like, hi, you people would not pick up our calls, or would be like, nahi, inse to nahi ho payega, kind of thing. And so it was a lot. And with what face do you go back to people and ask them for money, right? I mean, you have a history of failing, you don't have a history of success. But I remember in December, I was like, listen, I think we have enough experience of how to climb Everest. We are so much wiser. Maybe it's important that we take the flag of Adventure Pulse to the summit. And therefore, instead of trying to figure out money for two people, let's just put that money together for one person. And he was like, listen, you and I started this journey. We need to do it together. It's not happening. And I think that made such a difference to me personally, that we were in it together, and it was as important to him that both of us reached the summit of Everest. And it was important for him also to understand that I was willing to take that sacrifice and say, okay, listen, it's better that you go up. And I think that cemented or strengthened our friendship, especially after what we had been through.
Beautiful. Sam, now we'll come to the third attempt, when eventually you were able to summit the Everest successfully. And I'm going to ask you a very important question, and I'm going to give an analogy or an example. So when I started my corporate career, I was always fascinated with people who had a very high paying job. Infosys में हुआ था मेरा 2011 में, 2012 में, 2012 I got into Infosys. My package was 3 lakh. उस टाइम इतना ही मिलता था. हाथ में आते थे 23,000, 24,000. And at that time, couple of my friends went into Cisco and they were getting 8 lakh, 9. I'm like, fuck, 8 lakhs? 9 lakh? Imagine what I could do with 8 lakh LPA and a 9 lakh LPA. Eventually, progress in my career, reached up to good levels of salaries. And whenever I used to reach up to good level of salaries, something that I used to crave for. You like, ठीक है, ये तो वो तो हो गया, डुएबल है, उसकी अहमियत नहीं रही. आई वॉन्टेड मोर. 15 लाख, 20 लाख, 25 लाख, 30 लाख, 40 लाख. एंड आई नो कि अगर मेरा कल को 1 करोड़ का पैकेज हो जाएगा, आई बी लाइक, अब मैं 5 करोड़ कैसे करूं, अब मैं 10 करोड़ कैसे करूं, अब मुझे और चाहिए. नॉट enjoying that 1 crore, not enjoying that 50 lakhs, not enjoying that 10 lakh, but wanting more. So I'm going to ask you a question. After the third attempt, successful attempt, when you finally submitted Everest, what did you feel? Did you feel, what next? Or were you able to be in that moment, appreciate how far you have gotten, what you have done, what you've achieved, and more importantly, did you have that feeling ki fuck yeah, it was so worth it? And not because you finally did it, nahi, that it was genuinely worth it.
I think the third attempt, the third expedition, the entire expedition was faced with so much more anxiety every single step of the way because you don't take anything for granted, right? You've been here before, you've known the entire experience before, and I think till the moment that we approached or reached the summit, every single moment we're like, oh shit, something could go wrong, and you had that at the back of your mind, and therefore it made you a lot more careful, a lot more cautious. And finally, I think when we reached the summit, for me, it was possibly the greatest experience of my life, but not because I felt like as if, yes, we finally conquered this mountain, but more it was humbling because it really felt that after so much of mehnat, after so much of hard work, Everest has finally said, "Ha, theek hai, bhai, you earned the right to come and reach the top." And I think that feeling of being grateful for this experience was so much more because there was so much more preparation on this mountain. I mean, this was the third attempt on this mountain. We'd already reached 85% of the way in the previous attempt. So it became very familiar, very intimate. And of course, when we reached the top, it was not like the race was over. We hadn't crossed the finish line. You had to go back down as well. And Everest is notorious. One in every 10 climbers who reach the top don't come back home. And so you have this statistic at the back of your head, you have this knowledge, and therefore, you're careful. But having said that, when we reached the top of Mount Everest, there were hardly any climbers there. There were probably, I think, another 10, if not 15 climbers. So we spent 1 hour on the top of the world, just enjoying that experience of having done it. The weather was great. It was literally like a storybook ending, right? It was picture perfect. We had fantastic views around, and slowly and steadily we ended up coming back down, and of course being very, very careful. And when we reached Everest Base Camp, it was not just a celebration of us, but our families back home. The team that was with us at Everest Base Camp, I still remember they came into the glacier, or ek zamane mein used to get something called Everest beer. And they brought this Everest beer, and I'm telling you, that beer tasted like nectar from the gods. It was
Elixir, yeah.
amazing. I mean, that entire experience was fantastic. I intentionally remember walking back down the valley, even though there was a possibility of taking a helicopter out, because I wanted to thank each and every person that had supported us and prayed for us, who were part of the entire valley. So I truly took the time to appreciate that entire experience and revel in that movement. And of course, when you come back home, you're celebrated. There was a very strong sense of validation कि मैं नमूना नहीं हूँ, मैंने करके दिखाया है. I've actually done this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a failure in life. We were able to do it and come back. And I think that feeling of validation was very, very strong for a large part. But interestingly, after about a month of coming back home, suddenly there was this sense of void, because and this is something that I've spoken about, and it took me a lot of courage to be able to look into this and talk about this in the book as well. But you've been chasing this mission, this target, this endeavor for so long. You actually develop tunnel vision. You're waking up early in the morning at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and training. You're saving every single penny. You're cutting down on social life. Everything from daru, your khana, everything is regimented with this single-minded focus and determination. And now you've achieved it. And now what?
Yes.
And that feeling of suddenly, okay, now what do I do with my life, right? Ab ho gaya. I think that is something that I struggled with a lot. I didn't know how to deal with it. Um, Back in 2017, 18, I think it's not as popular as now, where you can address a professional, the psychotherapist or psychologist, and talk about this your emotions. You're a guy, or hamare desh mein you have to be a guy and keep your emotions inside and not address it and not talk to it, because that's what men do and that's what boys do, right? And I think I struggled to deal with what do I do with life after that. As you correctly said, how do you take this experience and how do you put it into a day to day lifestyle, right? Sleeping on a glacier versus sleeping on a soft mattress and thinking, ठीक है यार धंधा करना है business करना है. And I think that's where the fact that again we were a team, Suraj and I, and it was not just about climbing Everest, but also remembering that that tied in to a very strong extent with professional aspiration, right? And as we started talking more about experience, we found that a lot of people related not to us reaching the top of Everest, but to the setbacks that they have in life, right? And how do you overcome the setbacks and move forward? And as we shared this experience and spoke about it more, and also started encouraging people to trek with us and climb with us, I think that became the next purpose or sense of achievement. It wasn't about climbing the next biggest mountain. It was about taking those experiences and encouraging other people to climb and find their own Everest. And I think that's how, without even realizing it, we were able to create some sense of relatability and purpose in life.
Beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. Very nice. I can see that's the thing, right? You do feel that void after do achieving something. You do feel that void, and then there is this need to complete a circle.
Correct.
Ki,
Without a doubt.
I did it for my individuality. Now what? And in your case, it was then translated from individuality to collectivity. That now let's try to help those or to serve those who want to have the same experiences into various things. And I think that is absolutely beautiful. Circle completes. Otherwise, the void always remains. Ram, tell me, I'm very curious to know what is so special with the Sherpa community, man?
Honestly, imagine a child that is being born at an elevation on altitude of, I would say, 18,000 feet, 19,000 feet, in an environment which is hostile to you and me. You and me will not be able to walk, I would say, 100 meters without breathing heavily. And this is a child who's born there and plays there. I mean, I think that's the beauty about the Sherpa community. The Sherpa community actually started off as a nomadic tribe from the Tibetan plateau. And as they followed the yaks to greener pastures, crossed over the high mountains, and discovered this beautiful green valley in the shadow of Mount Everest. And they decided to settle down there. And uh, from nomads also ended up building villages, plowing the fields. And again, this is terrace farming at extremely high elevation. And I think as the first British expedition started and the Swiss expedition started exploring the higher mountains of the Himalayas after having climbed the Swiss and Italian Alps, they realized that, okay, I may have been really good in Switzerland when I was climbing mountains 3,000 meters, but suddenly I'm climbing mountains that are 6, 7, and 8,000 meters. और मुझसे ये बैग भी नहीं उठा पा रहे हैं. And these guys are carrying like rocks and picking up huge stones and walking like as if it's a piece of cake. And I think that's how the Sherpa community got involved in climbing. And you also have to remember that Nepal was never part of the British Commonwealth nation.
Yeah.
And so, when they started looking for jobs and employment, and this became a very interesting, unique skill set that they had. A lot of the Sherpas started coming into India, specifically Darjeeling. And therefore, you have a lot of Sherpa community that is part of Darjeeling who are part of these British expeditions. In fact, Tenzing Norgay, who is famously considered the first man to climb Everest with Edmund Hillary, was actually part of 7 British expeditions to climb, 7 Everest expeditions of various capacities, as a laborer, as a cook, as a high altitude porter carrying loads, before he was finally recognized as a climbing member who could actually be part of reaching the top of the mountain. And that's what gave them strength. They're so strong, they're so humble, to the largest extent that besides the Sherpa community, you also have the Gorkha community, which were part of the British military as well. Everybody knows about the strength and the courage of the Gurkhas. In fact, when the British finally left India, the Indian army said, okay, we will also have a Gurkha regiment. And so that's how they continued. And I think that's where the uniqueness of the Sherpa community comes in, and their history with mountaineering.
So it's their skills and their build is basically a result of the environment in which they were born.
Absolutely. I mean, nature has conditioned them through generations of selective adaptation to be specialists at high mountains. So when you hear about, people climbing Everest without oxygen, 99% of the time, it's usually a Sherpa.
Sam, one if there is one message that you would like your readers to take away after reading your book, that one core message that you want people to take away after they've finished reading your book, what would that be? Or what is that? What do you want people to take away?
It's interesting that you'd ask that, because I was just thinking about something that you said earlier, about compensation, right? And I think to a very large extent, compensation is translated into how much money do you make. And that definition of success is a definition that has been given to people, right? But I think from my experience, and I'm sure from your experience as well, I think it's important for us to define our own definition of success. Compensation is not just in monetary terms; it's in currency, it's in contacts that you make, it's with the great people that you have a chance to interact with. Today, if you compare your life to what it was when you were earning big bucks, you would definitely say it's a lot more richer, right, in
Yeah.
comparison. And I think that's why this book, when we were thinking of what do we title it at, is it Our Everest Story? I think we finally came to this conclusion that What's Your Everest is a perfect title for it, because after reading this, there is no mantra for success over here. It talks about failure, it talks about setbacks, it talks about us chasing after our dream. And after reading it, I'm hoping that somebody reads it and says, hey, it is going to be tough following your passion. It is going to be difficult, but at least it'll get them to start thinking about, okay, what is their success parameters? How do they define their success? Do they have the courage to chase it? Do they have the courage to fail and then come back and try again? I think that's what I would really love people to be able to read and get away with it. I'm not an author. We're just adventurers who decided to tell our story, and we're hoping by hearing the story or reading the story, people have the courage and determination to chase after their own Everest.
Beautiful. And I think this is what our entire conversation was also all about. That I got the essence was that you try, you try, you try. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult. Nothing is, milk and honey. It absolutely is not. And I think what a lot of people, Sam, do miss, right? They underestimate the power of patience. People think that everything is an overnight success. It's not. Patience. See, I always tell people that treat life like a test match, not a T20,
True.
not an ODI. Sam, last question. Any good movies or documentaries or books or anything that you like people to recommend to watch to get excited? Because these pop culture do push people a lot to explore.
The movie Everest is fantastic. It was released in 2015. It chronicles the 1996 tragedy on Everest and is a brilliant example of leadership styles as well. And it also talks a lot about Everest and the commercial aspect of climbing mountains. The documentaries on Netflix now, 14 Peaks is a fantastic watch. In fact, I'm still a big believer of old school books. They're great stories. Edmund Hillary has written a book called High Places, which talks about the first British expedition to climb Everest. They talked about putting saman and luggage from England onto a ship and coming down, sailing to Mumbai, offloading, putting it in trains, traveling across the country, putting it in trucks, going up to Darjeeling, and then carrying it for about a month just to reach the Everest Valley, right? And now we can just do Everest Base Camp and come back in 2 weeks' time. It gives you a perspective of how we've evolved. I think books are fantastic because it allows you to take the time to actually experience those adventures and those journeys. There's so many great books out there. There's a book written by Bear Grylls. Everybody knows him as Man vs. the Wild. But at the age of 22, he was the youngest British climber to climb Mount Everest
Oh
and come
wow.
back. So there's so many stories over there of people, and that's a great thing about mountaineering. It's all very recent. Reinhold Messner, who was the man who climbed 14 peaks, who was famous, and he did it without oxygen. He's written a book called My Quest for the Yeti. So here you've got legends about a famous mountaineer talking about,
A
something
mythical
as
figure. Yeah.
something as crazy as a Yeti, right? And I think that's the great thing about books. I'm a little old school, and of course, What's Your Everest is a great read.
Yeah, absolutely. Whatsoever is amazing. Absolutely bonkers. Wow, Sam, this has been amazing. I mean, I'm so pumped up and I'm feeling so positive after this conversation. And I really hope that the viewers, when they get to watch, they get the same feeling, man. Thank you so much for your time. Anything that you like to add? Any last parting words that you like to say?
Oh no, thank you, Raghav, and thank you so much for this opportunity. I think it's great that you're doing this. It's interesting because we're constantly told that, listen, paisa do, business badega. But the fact that non-authors like me have a chance to showcase work like What's Your Everest with you, I think that's great because it gives us an opportunity to be able to showcase adventures that about real people, about real experiences that have happened, as opposed to just books that give you this quick fix mantra on how to succeed in life.
Absolutely.
So, so
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity.